I was 24, slinging drinks at a dive bar on the edge of town, a grimy little spot with sticky floors and a jukebox that only played Johnny Cash or broke down trying. I'd been bartending there for about 6 months, working the night shift from 8 p.m. till closing at 3 a.m., sometimes later if the drunks didn't want to leave. It was a rough gig, but the tips were decent, and I liked the chaos of it, the way the bar came alive when the sun went down, all neon lights and cigarette smoke curling in the air. I was young, maybe a little too pretty for a place like that, which got me attention I didn't always want, but I could handle myself, or so I thought, until the night I realized one guy wasn't just watching me, he was hunting me. It was a slow Thursday in November, the kind of night where the cold keeps most people home, so the bar was quiet, just a few regulars nursing beers and a couple of truckers playing pool in the back. I was behind the counter, wiping down glasses, my hair tied back in a messy bun, probably smelling like whiskey and cheap perfume from a long shift. The bar's lights were dim, casting long shadows across the scarred wooden tables, and the jukebox was stuck on Folsom Prison Blues, looping like it was taunting me. I was in my zone, chatting with a regular Noah, this sweet old guy who always tipped extra and called me kid, when I noticed him for the first time, the guy I'll call K, sitting at the far end of the bar. He was maybe 40, lean but not skinny, with a face that looked like it'd seen too many bad days, deep lines around his eyes, a patchy beard, and this greasy baseball cap pulled low. He was nursing a Bud Light, his fingers wrapped tight around the bottle, but he wasn't drinking, just staring at it, or maybe through it, like he was somewhere else. I didn't think much of it at first. The bar got its share of weirdos, and I'd dealt with plenty of guys who thought staring was flirting. I walked over, flashed my bartender's smile, and asked if he wanted another. He looked up, and my stomach twisted. His eyes were this dull gray like dirty dishwater, and they locked onto me, not blinking, just taking me in. He said, low and slow, "No thanks, darlin'. I'm good." And that word, darlin', it didn't sound sweet. It sounded like a warning. I nodded, kept it professional, and went back to Noah, but I could feel Kay's eyes on me, like a weight pressing into my back. I glanced over, and sure enough, he was still staring, his head tilted just enough to make it creepy, like he was memorizing me. I told myself to shake it off, that he was just another lonely guy with nowhere else to go, but the vibe was off. I busied myself with restocking the cooler, trying to ignore him, but every time I looked up, he was there. Same spot, same stare, his beer untouched, condensation pooling on the counter. Around midnight, the crowd thinned out. Noah left, patting my hand and telling me to stay safe, which was sweet but didn't help the knot in my gut. The truckers were still at the pool table, arguing over a bad shot, so it was just me, them, and Kay in the bar. I was sweeping the floor near the counter when I heard this faint scrape, like a stool shifting. I looked up, and Kay was gone, his beer still sitting there, half full, the stool pushed back at an angle. My heart did a little stutter, and I scanned the bar, thinking maybe he'd gone to the bathroom. But the door to the men's room didn't swing, and the back exit was locked. I'd checked it myself at the start of my shift. Where the hell did he go? I don't know why, but I walked over to his spot, like I needed to prove he was really gone. The air around his stool smelled wrong, like sweat and something sharper, maybe motor oil. His beer was warm when I touched the bottle, like it had been sitting there for hours, and there was this smudge on the counter, a greasy fingerprint that hadn't been there before. I grabbed a rag, wiped it clean, my hands shaking a little, and that's when I heard it. A soft thump coming from the storage room behind the bar. Now, that room's where we kept the extra liquor, kegs, and cleaning stuff, and it was supposed to be locked, always, because the owner, a guy I'll call T, was paranoid about theft. I'd locked it myself when I opened it. I was sure of it, but that thump, it was too heavy to be a bottle falling, too deliberate to be an accident. I froze, listening hard. The jukebox was still droning, the truckers were laughing, but all I could hear was my own pulse hammering in my ears. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the counter, this old wooden thing T called the Peacemaker, and crept toward the storage room door. I thought maybe a rat or a box shifting, but my gut was screaming at me to call someone, anyone. I didn't, though, stupid, I know, but I was young, stubborn, and didn't want to look like I couldn't handle my shift. I reached for the doorknob, and my stomach dropped. It was unlocked, turning smooth under my hand, no resistance at all. I pushed the door open just a crack, the bat raised, and peered inside. The storage room was dark, the single bulb overhead burnt out weeks ago, and T was too cheap to replace it. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and cardboard, but there was something else, that same sour, oily stench I'd caught at Kay's stool. I whispered, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice barely audible, and got nothing back, just silence, heavy and wrong. I was about to step inside when I heard it again, that thump, closer now, like someone shifting their weight on the concrete floor. I slammed the door shut, my heart in my throat, and backed away, gripping the bat tight. I didn't call the cops right then. Maybe I was scared of overreacting. Maybe I didn't want T to think I was jumping at shadows. Instead, I locked the storage room door, double-checked it, and went back to the bar, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. Kay's stool was still empty, his beer still there, and the truckers were too wrapped up in their game to notice me shaking. I poured myself a shot of tequila, just to steady my nerves, and kept working. Around 2 a.m., Kay came back. I didn't see him walk in, didn't hear the front door chime, but there he was, back at his stool, same cap, same gray eyes, staring at me like he'd never left. My stomach lurched, and I almost dropped the glass I was holding. I forced myself to stay calm, walked over and said, "You need another," my voice tighter than I wanted. He smiled, this slow, crooked thing that made my skin crawl, and said, "You're real pretty when you're scared, darling." I froze, the bat too far under the counter to grab, my mind racing. He leaned forward, just a little, and whispered, "You should check your locks more carefully." Then he stood, tossed a crumpled 5 on the counter, and walked out, the door chiming behind him. I didn't breathe until he was gone. The truckers finally noticed something was up, asked if I was okay, and I lied. Said, yeah, just tired. But my hands were trembling as I locked the front door behind them when they left. I called T, told him what happened, and he said he'd be there in 20, but I wasn't waiting alone. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the operator about K, the storage room, the way he'd looked at me. They sent a patrol car, 2 cops, who got there just as T pulled up. I showed them the storage room, the unlocked door, the smudge on K's beer bottle. They searched the place, found nothing, no footprints, no signs of a break-in, just that faint, oily smell lingering in the air. The cops took my statement, said they'd look for K, but without a last name or a clear crime, there wasn't much they could do. T was pissed, not at me, but at the idea of some creep messing with his bar, and he promised to get the locks changed, maybe even install a camera. I didn't feel any better. I finished my shift, drove home with the doors locked, and my phone in my lap, checking my rearview mirror every 5 seconds. For days, I couldn't sleep. I started noticing things too, my car keys not where I left them, my apartment door feeling looser in its frame, like someone had been testing it. A week later, I saw K again, not at the bar, but at a gas station across town, standing by the pumps, watching me through the window as I paid for a coffee. I dropped the cup, scalding my hand, and ran to my car, locking the doors before I even looked back. He was gone when I did, no trace, like he'd vanished into thin air. I called the cops again, gave them the gas station's address, and they checked the security footage. They found him, clear as day, standing there, staring, but he wasn't on camera long enough for a plate number or an ID. They tracked him down a few days later, though, a guy with a record for loitering and a dropped stalking charge from years back. They arrested him for trespassing at another bar, not where I was working, but close enough to make me feel sick. I quit the bar the next day, moved to a new place, and got a day job at a coffee shop. But I still check my locks, still look over my shoulder. This happened when I was 26, working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station just off the highway. A lone outpost in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields that stretched out forever under the stars. The place was called Marty's Fuel Stop, though I never met Marty, just a flickering neon sign that buzzed like it was on its last legs. I'd been there about 4 months, pulling the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. grind, mostly because it paid better than flipping burgers, and I needed the cash to keep my apartment. The job was simple: stock shelves, ring up the occasional trucker or weary traveler, and try not to fall asleep behind the counter. Sounds boring, right? That's what I thought too, until the night I realized I wasn't as alone in that store as I thought I was. It was a Tuesday, I think, maybe Wednesday. One of those dead nights in late October when the air's got that crisp bite and the world feels too quiet. The store was empty, just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I was reorganizing the cigarette display behind the counter, mostly to keep my hands busy, when I heard this faint sound, like a soft shuffle, coming from the back of the store near the coolers. Now, you gotta understand, this place was old, built in the 70s, and it creaked and groaned like it had arthritis, so I didn't think much of it at first. Buildings make noises, you know? But then it happened again, sharper this time, like someone dragging their shoe across the linoleum. My stomach did a little flip, and I froze, listening hard. my hands still clutching a pack of Marlboros. I called out, my voice sounding stupidly loud in the silence. "Hey, is someone there?" Nothing. Just that hum from the lights and the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. I thought maybe a rat or the wind rattling something in the stockroom, but I couldn't shake this feeling. I grabbed the broom we kept behind the counter, not exactly a weapon, but better than nothing, and started walking toward the coolers, my sneakers squeaking on the floor. The aisles were empty. The mirrors in the corners showed nothing but my own pale face staring back, but that feeling didn't go away. When I got to the coolers, I saw something that made my heart skip. One of the glass doors, the one for the energy drinks, was cracked open just a hair, condensation dripping down like it touched. I know I hadn't left it like that, and nobody had come in since the last customer, a trucker who'd bought a coffee and left 2 hours ago. I pushed the door shut, my fingers shaking a little, and that's when I noticed the smudge on the handle, a greasy fingerprint that wasn't mine. My mouth went dry, and I backed up, scanning the store, the broom gripped so tight my knuckles ached. That's when I heard it again, that shuffle. But this time it was closer, somewhere in the snack aisle, maybe 10 feet away. I don't know why I didn't call the cops right then. Maybe I was too stubborn, thinking I could handle it, or maybe I was just scared of looking like an idiot if it turned out to be nothing. But I crept toward the aisle, my pulse hammering in my ears, and peeked around the corner. The aisle was empty, but the chip bags on the middle shelf were messed up, like someone had brushed past and knocked them out of place. I was shaking, my mind racing with all the worst possibilities. A tweaker looking for a quick score, some creep who'd been hiding in the store since before my shift started, watching me. I backed toward the counter, keeping my eyes on the aisles, and that's when I saw the shadow. It was quick, just a flicker in the corner of my eye, moving across the back wall near the stockroom door. Too big to be a rat, too human to be anything else. My stomach dropped, and I bolted behind the counter, grabbing the phone we kept for emergencies. My fingers fumbled the numbers, but I managed to dial 911, whispering to the operator that I thought someone was in the store with me. She told me to stay calm, lock myself in the office if I could, and that a patrol car was 10 minutes out. 10 minutes. Might as well have been an hour. I didn't make it to the office. The stockroom door creaked open before I could move, and I swear my heart stopped. I ducked behind the counter, clutching the broom, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, like whoever it was knew I was there and was taking their time. They stopped right on the other side of the counter, and I could smell this faint, sour stink, like sweat and cheap cologne. I don't know how long I crouched there, seconds or minutes, but then I heard this voice, low and raspy, say, "You're not supposed to be here." I nearly screamed, but I clamped my hand over my mouth, my whole body shaking. The voice wasn't talking to me. I realized it was like they were muttering to themselves, or maybe to someone else I couldn't see. I peeked over the edge of the counter, just enough to see, and there he was. A guy, maybe 30, scruffy beard, wearing a stained hoodie and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He was standing there, staring at the floor, his hands twitching at his sides like he was arguing with himself. In one hand, he held a knife, not a big one, but sharp enough to make my blood run cold. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe adrenaline, maybe stupidity, but I stood up, broom raised like I was gonna swing, and shouted, "Get out, or I'm calling the cops." My voice cracked, but it got his attention. He looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot, and for a second, I thought he was gonna lunge at me. But then, he just smiled, this creepy, lopsided grin, and said, "You don't even know, do you?" Before I could figure out what that meant, he turned and bolted toward the stockroom, the door slamming behind him. I didn't chase him. No way. I locked the front door, barricaded myself behind the counter, and waited for the cops, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. When they showed up, 2 officers searched the store top to bottom. The stockroom door was unlocked, which was weird because I'd locked it at the start of my shift. They found footprints in the dust back there, leading to a busted window that opened onto the back lot. Whoever he was, he'd gotten in that way, probably hours before I even noticed. The cops took my statement, dusted for prints, and told me they'd keep an eye out, but the guy was long gone. They figured he was a drifter, maybe high, looking for a place to crash or something to steal. They didn't find the knife, which freaked me out even more because it meant he still had it. I quit the job a week later, couldn't stomach going back, not after that. The worst part? A month later, I heard from a friend who still worked there that they'd caught someone breaking into the store again. Same description, scruffy beard, stained hoodie. The cops arrested him that time, found a knife on him, and a notebook full of weird, rambling notes about watching the night shift. I don't know if it was the same guy, but I like to think it was. Because the idea of there being more than one creep like that out there, that's too much. That wasn't the only time I felt like I was being watched on a night shift, though. A couple years later, I was working at a different place, a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind of spot where the coffee's always burnt and the jukebox only plays songs from the 80s. I was a server, mostly handling the graveyard crowd. Insomniacs, cops, the occasional drunk stumbling in for pancakes. It was a step up from the gas station, or so I thought, until the night I started noticing this guy who kept showing up. I'll call him K. He was older, maybe 50, with thinning hair and these thick glasses that made his eyes look too big. He'd come in around 2 a.m., always alone, always sitting in the same booth by the window, facing the parking lot. He'd order black coffee, nothing else, and just sit there, sipping it, staring out into the dark. At first, I didn't think much of it. People are weird on the night shift. But after a few weeks, I noticed he was watching me. Not obvious, not like he was leering, but subtle. Like he'd track me with his eyes when I walked by, or glance up when I was wiping down tables. It gave me the creeps, but I couldn't put my finger on why. One night, I was closing up, just me and the cook in the back. Kay was there, same booth, same coffee, but this time he stayed until we were locking up, which was unusual. Most customers clear out by 4 a.m. I was sweeping the floor when I caught him staring, not at the parking lot, but right at me, his head tilted like he was studying me. I forced a smile, said something like, "We're closing soon, sir," and he just nodded, didn't say a word. But that look in his eyes, it was like he knew something I didn't. I told the cook about it, and he laughed it off, saying Kay was probably just lonely, but I wasn't so sure. The next night, Kay was back. Same booth, same coffee. But this time he left something on the table when he went. A napkin with a phone number scrawled on it. No name, just the number, written in this shaky, uneven handwriting. I threw it out, didn't think twice, but my skin was crawling. I started watching the parking lot when I left work, making sure no one was following me to my car. A week later, I found another napkin. This one slipped under the wiper of my car, same shaky handwriting, but this time it said, "You're prettier at night." I called the cops that time. I was shaking, couldn't even drive home until they got there. The officer took the napkin as evidence, asked me about Kay, and said they'd look into it. They tracked him down a few days later. Turns out he lived in a trailer park nearby, had a history of stalking charges, nothing that ever stuck, but enough to make my stomach churn. They couldn't prove he'd left the napkins, not without cameras or witnesses, but they warned him to stay away from the diner. He stopped showing up after that, but I'd still catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those big glassy eyes staring from the dark.